HOA, Karen complained about my ugly doghouse. I found a 1957 zoning loophole, and she lost her garage. The night Carol's garage was marked with that bright orange condemnation notice, the snow made everything look almost peaceful. Wide, clean streets, a thin white layer on the asphalt, Christmas lights still clinging to gutters. And there she was in her neon green jacket and purple beanie, screaming at a zoning inspector, while I watched from my porch in a pale pink overcoat, gray scarf tucked in place, glasses on the tip of my nose. She pointed at me, shrill and furious. This is because of her stupid doghouse. The inspector just held up a folder with her own signatures all over it and said, "Ma'am, this is because of your violations from 1957 forward." She just filed the complaint correctly. Our neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The same people who'd whispered that Mark and I were dirty, reckless animal hoarders. They'd believed Carol when she said the rescued dog in that ugly little outdoor shelter was diseased, a threat to the whole pristine community. I simply smiled, that small, ironic curve I hadn't used since I retired from law. She tried to ruin my life over a temporary doghouse. Instead, a forgotten zoning clause from 1957 had just taken her garage. If you want to know how a bored HOA bully ended up losing everything to paper, stamps, and deadlines, subscribe and stay with me, because the HOA had no idea who they were dealing with. I moved into that perfect little winter postcard almost 15 years ago. Wide, clean streets, maples lined up like soldiers, the kind of neighborhood brochure companies drool over. Back then, the snow felt cozy instead of watchful. I was still practicing law full-time, the shark in heels and a navy suit. Mark was the young veterinarian everyone adored. 10 years younger, kind, funny, the man who somehow decided a tired, gray-haired litigator was his person. That age gap never bothered us, but it bothered other people. You could see it in the way some wives looked at me at block parties, their eyes doing the math. "So, you retired already?" they'd ask, voice sugar sweet. "Must be nice having a little houseboy bringing home the bacon." They laughed. I smiled. I'd cross my legs, adjust my pale pink overcoat and gray scarf, and let them think whatever made them feel safer. Carol moved in maybe 5 years after us. She arrived like a high-visibility vest made human, neon green jacket, purple beanie, clipboard under one arm, HOA rulebook clutched to her chest like a Bible. She volunteered for every committee before she even finished unpacking. Just want to keep things nice. She'd tell anyone who'd listen. What she meant was, I want control. At first, she was just background noise. I was tapering off my caseload, easing into retirement, finally allowing my shoulders to relax after decades of courtrooms and conference calls. Mark's practice was busy, and our little house felt warm and full. 2 spoiled cats who believed the sun rose for them, one elderly golden mix who snored louder than some men I've cross-examined. We didn't have much extra space inside, but we had enough love to make up for it. If we'd had a larger home, we would have turned it into an unofficial rescue. As it was, Mark already brought home more strays than takeout. For a while, life was simple. Snow in winter, barbecues in summer. I'd walk the streets in my brown slacks and pink coat, gray hair down my back, glasses perched on the tip of my nose, and people would wave. "That's Eleanor," they'd say, sweet older lady with the vet husband and the cute pets. And for a time, it really did feel like we'd found peace. A quiet cul-de-sac, a man I loved, animals who adored us, and a career finally laid to rest. Until one bitter evening that winter, when I spotted a shivering shadow under a parked truck, and the first small crack in our perfect neighborhood quietly opened. The night I found him, the air hurt to breathe. I was walking back from the little pharmacy in the next town over, boots crunching on that thin layer of snow, hands buried in the pockets of my pale pink overcoat, gray scarf snug around my neck. Street lights threw long, orange pools on the asphalt. That's when I heard it, this soft, broken whine from under a parked pickup. He was just a shadow at first. Then my eyes adjusted. Ribs like piano keys, fur matted, one paw held up like it hurt to touch the ground. He flinched when I crouched, my brown slacks pulling tight at the knees, glasses sliding down my nose. I spoke softly. "Hey there, sweetheart. Where'd you lose your people?" No collar, no tags, just that hollow, desperate look I've seen too many times in courthouse victims and rescue kennels. Mark met us at the front door, still in his scrubs, stethoscope around his neck. The moment he saw the dog in my arms, he switched into vet mode. Inside. Now. We already had a full house, 2 smug cats ruling the couch, and our old golden mix snoring in the corner. Space was aspirational. For 3 hours that night, our kitchen became an exam room. Warm bath, gentle hands, vaccines, parasite meds, soft towels by the heater. Mark murmured clinical things. I murmured promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "We'll hold him a few days," Mark said, rubbing the dog's ears. "If someone's looking, they'll call the shelters." No one called. Day after day, we checked online boards, shelters, vets in the next town. Nothing. Meanwhile, our living room turned into a turf war. The cats puffed up and hissed from the back of the sofa. Our old dog growled if the newcomer got too close to his bed. Cramped walls, nervous animals, winter pressing at the windows. It wasn't sustainable. So we built him something outside. I said one morning, watching the snow drift over our wide, too clean street, just until everyone adjusts, or until his owner magically appears. The doghouse was never meant to be pretty. We bought a prefab plastic shell on sale. Mark added insulation. I lined it with old blankets and a heat pad rated for outdoor use. Tucked under the eave by the back fence, shielded from wind, with fresh water that we changed constantly so it wouldn't freeze. It looked utilitarian, slightly crooked, beige, against all that perfect white. But it was safe, warm, temporary. That's when Carol noticed. I was in the yard one afternoon, cheeks numb from the cold, adjusting the little flap on the front of the doghouse when her voice cut through the stillness like a siren. "What is that?" I turned. Neon green jacket, purple beanie, clipboard already in hand, HOA rulebook clutched like scripture. She had her phone out, camera app open, framing my yard like a crime scene. "It's a temporary shelter," I said calmly, brushing snow off my coat sleeves. "We're fostering a lost dog. Just until—" "You're running a kennel," she snapped. "Outdoor structure not pre-approved. Multiple animals, unsanitary conditions. This is not that kind of neighborhood." She said, that kind like it tasted bad. The wind whipped my hair around my face. "Carol, he was starving in the snow. We have 2 cats and another dog inside that don't accept him yet. This is transitional. He's vaccinated, treated, and—" She zoomed her camera in on the dog, sniffing from inside the little house. "Looks diseased. Mange probably. Those things spread. To other dogs. To children." Her eyes flicked over me, icy and calculating. "To people with weaker immune systems." I knew what she meant. Older. Me. I felt that first small sting of humiliation, standing there in my tidy brown slacks and pink coat, while she documented my compassion like it was a code violation. She scribbled something on her clipboard with theatrical fury. "You'll get a notice," she said, turning on her heel. "We have standards here." At the time, I thought it would be one annoying letter. Maybe a warning to move the house. A neighbor being, well, a neighbor. I had no idea that this ugly little plastic shelter was about to become the weapon she used to turn the whole community against us. If you've ever had someone twist a good deed into a crime, hit the like button now, because that day I thought she was just a nosy neighbor. I didn't realize it was only the first test. The first letter showed up 3 days later, nestled between a grocery ad and Mark's vet journal. I was at the kitchen counter in my brown slacks and pale pink overcoat, having just come in from checking the doghouse, melting snow still clinging to my boots. Notice of violation. The envelope screamed in red. Inside it was worse. Grainy photos of the little plastic shelter, my rescued dog Midblink. So he looked half feral. Words like unsanitary, unauthorized structure, potential health hazard. At the bottom, Carol's confident, looping signature as HOA compliance chair. Mark read over my shoulder, jaw tightening. She makes it sound like you're running a biohazard lab, not trying to keep a dog from freezing to death. I shrugged out of my coat, hung it neatly, smoothed my gray scarf. It's a warning. Bureaucrats love paper. Let her have her moment. Her moment escalated quickly. Within a week, the whispers started. I'd walk down our wide, clean street, a thin layer of snow crunching under my boots, and the same neighbors who used to wave now pulled their kids closer. "Don't go near that house," I heard one mother hiss as I passed. "That's where the sick dogs are." At the mailbox cluster, a man I barely knew stepped back from me like I was radioactive. "Nothing personal," he muttered, eyes fixed on the frost. "But Carol says you're bringing in strays from God knows where. She mentioned parasites, rabies. We've got kids." I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose and gave him a polite, razor-thin smile. "My husband is a veterinarian. Our animals are vaccinated and treated. You're welcome to ask him anything you like." He didn't. He just fled, letters clutched like a shield. The next HOA newsletter might as well have been written in blood. A bold-faced section titled Community Health Alert warned vaguely about residents harboring potentially diseased animals and unapproved outdoor structures that may decrease property values. No names, of course. Cowards seldom sign their gossip. But every arrow pointed straight at our small, beige doghouse tucked by the back fence. At the holiday block gathering, the air outside bit like broken glass. I showed up in my pink overcoat and gray scarf, hair pinned back neatly, a tray of cookies in hand. Conversations died when I approached. A few women glanced from me to Mark, then to each other, lips thinning. One of them, Lisa, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Wow, Eleanor, you must really love dogs. Must be hard for Mark, working all day, and then coming home to that." "To what?" I asked mildly. She faltered, cheeks pink from more than the cold. "Just, all those animals. At your age, I mean, your immune system." She caught herself, eyes darting toward Carol, who stood nearby in her neon green jacket and purple beanie, clipboard tucked under her arm like a trophy. Carol swooped in. "We just want to keep everyone safe," she announced loudly for the benefit of every eavesdropping neighbor. "Some people don't realize that street dogs can carry all kinds of things. Mange, heartworm, even things that jump to humans. I'm sure Eleanor means well, but this isn't a shelter." I could feel the weight of 20 sets of eyes on my back. For the first time in a very long career, I felt truly outnumbered. Mark opened his mouth, anger flushing his face, but I laid a hand on his arm. "Not here." The second letter came a week later. This one had teeth, a small fine attached citing continued noncompliance and failure to remove unsightly structure. A note at the bottom, handwritten in a self-important scrawl. "Further action will be necessary if this matter is not resolved promptly." I set it on the table beside the first notice, lining the edges up perfectly. My fingers were steady, my chest was not. It wasn't the $50 fine, that stung. It was the sideways glances at the pharmacy, the couple who crossed the street when I stepped outside to sweep our walkway, the little girl who used to ask to pet our old golden, now hiding behind her mother when we walked by. I had spent decades dismantling liars on the stand, yet here I was in my own neighborhood, tried and convicted by rumor. That's when the copies started. Anonymous flyers, same language as the newsletter, same phrasing I'd seen in Carol's letter, appeared on doorsteps and slipped under doormats. Protect our property values. Say no to backyard kennels. One even featured a blurry, zoomed-in shot of the doghouse from behind our fence, taken from a height that suggested either a ladder or a drone. I stood at my front window one gray afternoon, pale sky heavy with more snow, and watched Carol waddle from house to house, neon jacket a smear of poison against the white, clipboard, rulebook, that ridiculous purple beanie. Every so often, she'd glance at our home, at me, framed in the glass, and smirk. In the yard behind her, I saw a glint on her own roofline. A small black security camera, recently installed, pointed not at her property but at the shared alley. Another on the corner of her garage. She was watching all of us, documenting, building her own little kingdom of footage and fear. Mark came up beside me, slipping an arm around my waist. "We can move the doghouse," he said, quietly. "Figure something else out. I hate seeing you like this." I rested my head against his shoulder for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of antiseptic and winter air. I felt 80, not 60, old, tired, and suddenly very small in a place that used to feel like home. "It's temporary," I murmured. "All of it. The doghouse, the gossip, her reign." He pulled back to look at me. My glasses had slid down to the tip of my nose. My lips pressed into that thin, ironic curve I hadn't worn in years. Because beneath the hurt, something colder had settled in. They wanted to play the game with notices, gossip, and social exile. Fine. They were writing everything down for me. What the HOA didn't realize yet was that every snide flyer, every improperly worded violation, every photo taken from the wrong angle was quietly being filed away. Not in their office, in mine. The third letter arrived in a thicker envelope. By then, the snow had turned to that gray, compacted crust that squeaks under your boots. I'd just come in from checking the little outdoor shelter, straightening the flap, making sure the heated pad was working, when I saw it on the console. Certified mail. HOA letterhead. I set my pale pink overcoat on the hook, smoothed my gray scarf, and slid it open. This one wasn't just a notice. It was an invoice. Aggregate fines due, $750. Daily penalty will accrue until subject structure is removed and all unregistered animals are removed from premises. Unregistered animals, like the living being sleeping warmly because Mark and I refused to let him freeze. There was more. A threat, couched in legalese, about referral to county health and zoning authorities, lien proceedings, even potential legal action. At the bottom, in thick, confident loops, Carol's signature. Mark's face went from tired to thunderous as he read. "They can't just stack fines like this. We're not a puppy mill. We took in one starving dog." I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose, reading every line twice. Their citations were sloppy, half copied from some template, half invented. They hereby ordered us to remove the doghouse within 72 hours. They reminded us that exterior alterations required prior approval. Never mind that half the neighborhood had sheds, pergolas, extra lights bolted into their roofs. And then came the kicker. 2 days later, an email blast to all residents. Due to ongoing noncompliance at one property, it read, "The board has unanimously approved a special assessment to cover legal consultation, pest control inspections, and additional security infrastructure necessary to protect our community from health risks." Attached was a budget proposal Carol had clearly cobbled together between spying sessions, line items for external consultant, health inspector retainer, and tucked neatly under security improvements, several $1,000s for cameras, motion sensors, and a drone. Neighbors forwarded it to each other with little notes. "See what you started, Eleanor." One even accidentally CC'd me on a message complaining about the crazy old animal hoarder and her boy toy vet. The humiliation wasn't abstract anymore. It had a dollar value spread across every mailbox on our pristine, wide street. People weren't just avoiding us. Now they were paying for the privilege of being afraid of us. The next week, a man from a pest control company walked the perimeter of our yard with Carol glued to his side, neon green jacket, bright against the pale snow. She gestured dramatically at the doghouse, at our windows, at my flower beds buried under ice. I watched from inside, brown slacks pressed, hair pinned back, the rescued dog asleep by the heater, for once. The following day, we got a preline notice. If we didn't pay the fines and remove all problematic elements within 30 days, the HOA reserved the right to attach a lien to our home. Mark paced our living room, hands in his hair. "We can't just ignore this, Elle. A lien can screw up everything. Refinancing, selling, our credit. Our savings are for retirement, not feeding her power trip." I sat at the dining table, spread the letters out in chronological order, and smoothed the edges until they aligned in a perfect rectangle. My fingertips traced Carol's signature, over and over. So proud, so certain. "They escalated to money," I said quietly. "Good. Money leaves tracks." He stopped pacing. "What are you thinking?" I let that old, familiar smile appear. The small, ironic curve I'd shelved the day I walked out of my last courtroom. "I'm thinking that for someone who loves rules, our dear compliance chair is remarkably lazy about reading the ones that actually matter. City ordinances, state statutes, zoning codes." I picked up the preline notice by its corner like a specimen under glass. "She wants to drag in county health and zoning? Perfect. Because once they're in, this stops being her little fiefdom." Outside, a delivery truck slid by on the slush, the whole world muffled under that thin layer of dirty snow. Inside, it felt like something in me had thawed and hardened all at once. Up until that moment, I'd been reacting, hurt, humiliated, trying to explain. Now, with the threat of a lien on the house I'd built a life in, something very old in me sat up straight. "They're not going to stop," I said. "If I roll over on this, the next person with a barking dog or a chipped shutter is going to get the same treatment. This isn't about a doghouse anymore. It's about power." Mark sank into the chair across from me, searching my face. "So what do we do?" I gathered the letters into a neat stack and tapped them on the table, the sound crisp in the quiet kitchen. The retired shark had smelled blood. "First," I said, standing to fetch my old briefcase from the closet, "we stopped playing defense." Because that was the day I understood. They would happily take our money, our reputation, even our home, if no one made them pay a price. And if I didn't do something, they'd break a lot more people than just me. Tell me in the comments if you've ever watched someone like Carol bully an entire neighborhood, because this was where I stopped being their victim and started being their problem. I hadn't opened my old briefcase in years. That night, with the preline notice on the table and the house quiet except for the soft snore of our old golden and the rescued dog shifting by the heater, I slid my pale pink overcoat off the chair, wrapped my gray scarf a little tighter, and went to the hall closet. Leather creaked when I pulled it down. It still smelled faintly of copier toner and adrenaline. I carried it to the dining table like a relic, set it beside Carol's stack of threats, and clicked it open. Inside were the tools of a life I'd supposedly left behind. A portable scanner, a travel-sized hole punch, tabs in a dozen colors, and tucked under an old trial notebook, a thin, black, 3-ring binder labeled, in my own cramped handwriting, HOA, CC, and RS and local overlay. Mark blinked. "You kept that?" Habit, I said, sliding my glasses down to the tip of my nose. The first thing I do anywhere I live is read the rules and the laws that sit on top of them. Covenants, conditions, restrictions, city code, county code, zoning overlays. It's how you survive bored little tyrants before they even know they're tyrants. I downloaded every governing document when we moved in, printed them, annotated them in the margins over cups of late-night tea, while Mark slept. At the time, it was just something to keep my shark brain busy as I eased into retirement. Now, those same pages felt like a loaded weapon. I started with our own CC and RS, leafing through to the section on nuisances, structures, and animals. Carol had underlined half of it in her letters, but skimmed past the rest. No surprise. People like her love bold print and bullet points. They never read the footnotes. The fine schedule she'd used? Discretionary, not mandatory. The mandatory, lean timeline she'd threatened? Only valid if the board followed notice procedures they'd clearly never heard of. I checked our envelopes. Wrong font, wrong headings, no board vote minutes attached, no certified proofs to half the things she claimed had gone out. Sloppy, I murmured, very sloppy. Then I pulled out the second stack from the briefcase, a tabbed binder of city ordinances and zoning code. That was my secret vice. Most lawyers specialize. I'd always collected codes the way other women my age collected recipes. Why zoning? Mark asked, watching me flip past articles on setbacks and accessory structures. Because, I said, HOAs think their little rule books are the 10 Commandments. But all of this, I tapped the heavy city volume, sits above them. And this, I flicked Carol's letters, only has teeth if it lines up with this. Outside, our wide, clean street glowed under the streetlights, a thin, icy crust of snow making everything look still, frozen, perfect. Under that calm, you could almost hear the hum of Carol's new cameras on her eaves, the whir of the drone she'd buzzed over our yard last weekend, paid for with security funds. I thought of that email. Assessments for pest control, external consultants, and surveillance gear. I'd seen that movie before in a dozen condo associations. Board treasurers dipping into the pot, compliance chairs padding invoices. I opened my laptop, logged into the county's public records portal, and started pulling filings. Articles of incorporation for the HOA, annual reports, recorded amendments. Then I moved to the city's online map, drilling down through zoning layers, overlays, everything that had ever been passed about our subdivision. Dates. That's what caught my eye. Our tract, platted in the 1950s. A sleepy little post-war grid of modest homes and detached garages, all under an old residential zoning category. In 1957, the city council had passed a quirky little ordinance about accessory structures, garages, sheds, outbuildings grandfathering in anything existing at the time, but putting razor-sharp limits on anything built or materially altered afterward. Setback changes, easement encroachments, prohibitions on converting a detached garage to certain uses without specific variances. I clicked through the aerial history no one ever looks at, satellite photos layered by decade. Our house, our neighbors, the tidy little lots, and then Carol's. In the 1960s aerial, her backyard showed a small single-bay garage set neatly inside the original lines. By the 1980s, that single bay had mysteriously grown into a hulking two-car box squatting right up against the rear easement, with a bump-out that almost kissed the side fence. No variance on file. No permit attached to the parcel history. Just there. Interesting, I whispered. Mark leaned in. What? I toggled between the code and the map, the pieces clicking together like a lock turning. In 1957, the city said, whatever you have now, you can keep. Touch it without permission, you lose your protection. That's the loophole. Anything built or expanded after that, across the line, is technically illegal. And guess whose monument to overcompensation is sitting right on top of a utility easement without a recorded variance? The corner of my mouth lifted. That old, controlled, dangerous smile. Our very own compliance chair. Her garage. The shrine where she stored her binoculars, her drones, her stacks of old newsletters. The symbol of how she'd outgrown the little starter home she pretended was beneath her. I scrolled down to the complaint procedures. City zoning, county code enforcement, anonymous reporting accepted, mandatory investigation if certain boxes were checked, especially when potential easement obstruction and safety hazards were involved. This wasn't about revenge for a doghouse anymore. It was about showing a bully what real authority looked like. I closed the binder, slid off my glasses, and looked across the table at Mark. From here on out, I said, voice steady as a gavel, we don't argue with her letters. We build a record. We let the city do what the city does best, enforce its own forgotten rules. In that moment, I stopped being the woman Carol could shove around with flyers and fines. I went back to being what I'd been for 30 years, the quiet, patient predator who reads every line no one else bothers to read. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning, and I had decades of procedural warfare at my back that the HOA didn't even know existed. Once I knew about the 1957 zoning loophole and that swollen, overgrown box Carol called a garage, the game became very simple. Document, verify, and wait. Winter helped. The cold kept people indoors, curtains half drawn, and it made every sound travel. Boots on snow, drones buzzing, voices carried in the brittle air. I started treating my quiet little street like a case file. I bought a fresh legal pad, labeled it Carol Timeline, and set it on the dining table beside my laptop. Every time a new email blast went out, every HOA reminder, every flyer I found half frozen in someone's front yard, I wrote down the date, time, and exact language. Copies went into plastic sleeves in a binder. Screenshots went into a folder on my desktop. Their sloppiness became my structure. When Carol's new drone first skittered over our fenced yard, paid for with that security assessment, I stepped outside in my pale pink overcoat, gray scarf tucked neatly, brown slacks brushing the snow. I looked straight up at the blinking little bug, lifted my phone, and filmed it. 2 minutes later, I had the invoice for it from the HOA's shared drive, buried under infrastructure, authorized and signed by Carol herself. Clip, print, sleeve. Mark would shake his head, watching me move between laptop, scanner, and binder like I'd never retired. You're building a war room, he said one night, scratching our old Golden while the rescued dog snored by the heater. I'm building a record, I corrected, sliding my glasses down to read a PDF of city inspection protocols. Records when tempers burn out. Next came the paper trail outside our four walls. I pulled property records for Carol's parcel, old plats, hand-drawn survey lines, the original permit for that single-bay garage. I highlighted the setbacks, 6 feet from rear property line, 4 from the side. Then I layered the current aerial on top, tracing with a ruler. Her expanded 2-car fortress practically sat on the rear line and kissed the side easement. No variance, no inspection, just decades of nobody noticing, until the woman she tried to break over a doghouse opened the right book. I needed corroboration, photos taken from public vantage points, only sidewalk, alley, the shared mailbox cluster. In my pink coat and gray scarf, I looked like any other older neighbor taking a winter stroll, not a retired litigator lining up angles. I snapped the garage from the alley, where you could clearly see the wall sitting on top of the utility markers. Another from the street, showing the bump out jutting into what the plat called drainage and access. At the same time, I kept one eye on the HOA's money, their annual budget, and monthly minutes were technically public to members. Carol just counted on no one reading beyond the dues amount. I did, line by line. In January alone, miscellaneous security had tripled. Camera systems billed to a P.O. box matching the pest control contractor's address. Food deliveries reimbursed as meeting refreshments on days with no meetings scheduled. Highlight, screenshot, print. I could have confronted her, walked up in my neat overcoat while she trudged in her neon green jacket and purple beanie clipboard clutched, and said, "I know what you're doing." But confrontation feeds people like Carol. Silence starves them. Instead, I started talking to the people who actually mattered, the ones with badges and city email addresses. I called zoning enforcement first. Calm voice, no drama. "I'm a homeowner in the 1957 overlay district." I said, giving our subdivision name. "I believe one property may be encroaching on a recorded easement and may have expanded a structure without required permits. I can email parcel ID, historical plats, and current photos." The investigator on the other end perked up the moment I mentioned easement obstruction and post 1957 modification without variance. They lived for this kind of forgotten technicality. I sent a tidy packet, plat code section, annotated screenshots, and yes, a copy of the HOA newsletter where Carol bragged about my expanded 2-car garage in a president's note from years back. Next, I filed a complaint with the city's code compliance portal, attaching the same evidence. No anonymous ranting, just citations and exhibits. I flagged the drone use while I was there, attaching the HOA invoice she'd signed. Let them decide whether that fell under nuisance, privacy, or misuse of association funds. Then came the county. Our state's laws on common interest communities required HOAs to maintain accessible, accurate financials. I drafted a polite, deadly precise email, dates when members had requested budgets and been brushed off, screenshots of Carol unilaterally approving expenses, and the growing pile of security gear. I requested, as a member in good standing, that the county's Oversight Division review whether our board was in compliance. Every submission got printed and slid into its own tab in my binder. Zoning, code, county. I tracked response times like a scientist. Acknowledgement emails, case numbers, estimated inspection windows. Inside the neighborhood, I stayed boring. I paid the disputed fines, under protest, noting it in a certified letter, so they couldn't fast-track a lien. I attended one HOA meeting, sat in the back in my pink overcoat, gray scarf neatly folded in my lap, listened to Carol rant about biohazards and community standards, and said nothing, just jotted down exact quotes, with timestamps. By late February, my binder was thick, color-tabbed, and terrifying if you knew how to read it. Carol thought she was tightening a noose around my little doghouse. She had no idea she'd already stepped into a much older, much stricter one the city wrote in 1957. All that was missing was the moment she'd overplay her hand in front of witnesses. So when an email went out announcing an emergency HOA meeting to address one resident's ongoing violations and additional sanctions, I felt the click of a trap closing. She thought it would be my public shaming. I knew it would be the stage for hers. If you're enjoying watching this slow, quiet setup, subscribe now, because the next part is where every one of those little pieces of paper finally explodes in her face. The emergency meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday night, 7 p.m. sharp, in the little HOA clubhouse at the end of our wide, too clean street. By then the snow had formed that thin, icy shell that makes every step sound louder than it should. You could hear people shuffling in from half a block away. Carol framed it as a last stand for community standards. The email subject line was breathless: health and safety crisis, mandatory attendance. The body was worse, a not-so-subtle description of one resident harboring potentially diseased animals in an unsightly backyard structure. No names, of course. Just arrows. Straight at my ugly little doghouse. Perfect. That afternoon, I laid my outfit out like armor. Brown slacks pressed sharp, pale pink overcoat brushed free of lint, light gray scarf folded just so. Glasses polished, ready to sit on the tip of my nose. I slid my binder, the thick one with zoning tabs, HOA budgets, and every one of Carol's emails, into my old briefcase. The leather creaked in a way that made my shoulders square a little more. Mark watched me from the doorway, arms folded. "You're sure you're up for this?" I adjusted my scarf in the hall mirror, gray hair falling straight down my back. My reflection looked like any other 60-year-old woman on a cold night. Not like the shark I used to be. That was fine. Sharks don't need to advertise. "I'm not going there to argue about a doghouse," I said. "I'm going there to let her talk. On the record." We walked down the street together, boots crunching softly on that thin layer of ice. Warm light glowed from picture windows. Silhouettes moved behind curtains. Some neighbors watched us pass, then quickly pretended they hadn't. One woman hurried her child inside, like we were bringing the plague. Inside the clubhouse, the heat was up too high. Coats steamed on the backs of metal chairs. Fluorescent lights buzzed. A folding table at the front held a plastic gavel, a coffee urn, and, of course, Carol's Holy Trinity, neon green jacket, purple beanie, and the black HOA rulebook. She already had the floor when we slipped into seats near the back. Clipboard in hand, cheeks flushed, she paced like a prosecutor in a TV drama. "We cannot ignore this any longer," she declared, voice ringing off the beige walls. "We have a resident," her eyes flicked to me, "who insists on keeping an outdoor kennel, bringing in strays of unknown origin, exposing our families to disease. And she refuses to comply with repeated notices and fines." Murmurs rippled through the room. A man near the front turned to squint at me like I was a case study in contagion. I set my briefcase at my feet, folded my hands on my lap, and listened. Carol clicked her remote, and a slideshow appeared on the pull-down screen. Grainy zoom-ins of the beige doghouse by our fence, the rescued dog midshake, making him look half-rabid. She'd even included a still frame from her drone footage, taken illegally above our yard. In the corner of the photo, you could see the drone's own shadow. "This," she announced, tapping the screen, "is what's dragging our property values down. This is a liability. I have consulted pest control, security experts, even preliminary legal counsel. All of that costs money. Your money." She flipped to a slide labeled "Costs to Community," filled with numbers she'd inflated beyond recognition. Cameras, drones, consulting, all conveniently mashed together, as if every frivolous toy she bought was my fault. "Frankly," she went on, looking right at me now, "if a homeowner can't follow simple rules, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for them." That got a few nods, one or two satisfied little smirks. I felt Mark tense beside me. I laid a hand on his knee. "Not yet," because what Carol didn't understand was that this theater, these slides, this sanctimonious speech, this roomful of witnesses, was exactly what I needed. She was putting her overreach on display. For the record, she was linking my doghouse to every dollar she'd quietly siphoned from the HOA's account, under the guise of security and consulting. She was tying her own noose and looping it through the one thing more powerful than an HOA rulebook, City Zoning Code from 1957. When she finally called for discussion, "I think the board should consider escalating fines, or even seeking legal removal of the offending animals," I raised my hand. Her expression, when she had to acknowledge me, grudgingly, because ignoring me in front of a room full of people would look bad, was almost worth the months of harassment. "Yes, Eleanor," she said, "sugar over steel." I stood slowly, smoothing my pink overcoat. letting the room see exactly who they decided was their villain, a small, neat woman in her 60s with gray hair down her back and an expression as calm as fresh snow. "I have a few questions," I said, voice even, "about process, about money, and about structures built in violation of the 1957 zoning overlay." A few heads turned toward the back. Someone frowned. Carol's smile wobbled, because that one word, 1957, meant nothing to most of the room. But she knew I hadn't pulled it out of thin air, and deep down, in the part of her brain that remembered exactly how that oversized garage of hers had gotten there, something icy started to crack. When they scheduled that emergency meeting to deal with my case, I knew exactly what it would become. It wouldn't be my trial. It would be the perfect stage for their fall. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the silence work for me. "In your slideshow," I began, glasses low on my nose, "you mentioned thousands spent on security and consulting because of my supposed violations. Could you clarify which invoices specifically were tied to my address?" Carol shifted behind the folding table, neon green jacket creaking. "It's all in the budget," she snapped. "You've seen the emails." "I have," I said, "along with the receipts." I bent, opened my briefcase, and laid a thin stack of color copies on the front table. For everyone else, these are reimbursements Carol approved to herself for meeting refreshments on days there were no meetings. And these, I tapped another stack, are the security purchases, drone cameras, binoculars, all signed by Carol, all coded under infrastructure. A murmur rolled through the room. Someone hissed, "You bought a drone with our dues?" Carol's cheeks went blotchy red. We needed tools to monitor noncompliance. Her eyes drilled into me. "You brought this on yourself." I smiled faintly. "Interesting you say monitor, because some of those tools were used to film my fenced backyard. That's Exhibit C." I nodded to the screen. "You showed everyone a drone still a moment ago. Here's the invoice for that same serial number." I flipped open my binder to a tab marked zoning. "But let's talk about structures. You've argued my temporary doghouse," a few people snickered at the word, "is an unapproved eyesore, risking property values. You fined me, threatened a lien, and called this meeting over it." I turned another page. Our subdivision, as some of you may not know, sits under a 1957 zoning overlay. It grandfathered in existing accessory structures, garages, sheds, but strictly limited expansions after that year. Any enlargement beyond original setbacks requires a variance and inspection. Who cares about 1957? Carol barked. "We have our own rules." "Your rules," I said softly, "don't override city law." I held up a yellowed plat map in a plastic sleeve. "This is the original recorded survey of Carol's lot. One single bay garage, 6 feet off the rear line, from the side." Now, I slipped out a recent aerial photo, projected on the screen with a tap. "This is Carol's garage today. 2 bays, bump out to the side, wall sitting directly on the rear easement. Heads turned toward her house, as if they could see through the clubhouse wall. A board member leaned forward. "Wait, you expanded the garage." Carol laughed, high and brittle. "That was done years ago. Everyone knew. It's fine." "It would be," I agreed, "if a variance had ever been granted. But there isn't one." I confirmed with the city. No permits, no inspections, no recorded variance. Just a structure illegally enlarged after 1957, sitting on top of a drainage and utility easement. I let that hang. The word illegal made a couple of people sit back hard. And because Carol kindly dragged zoning and health and safety into this, I continued. The city is now involved. Zoning has opened a case. Code enforcement has opened a second. The county's HOA Oversight Division has a third regarding financial transparency and self-dealing. I tapped her signatures. Same name on every line. You reported me? Her voice cracked, eyes wide, red hair frizzing out from under the purple beanie. I filed factual complaints. I said, with documentation. Nothing more, nothing less. I looked around the room. While she was finding me over a plastic doghouse sheltering one vetted vaccinated rescue because my 2 indoor cats and elderly dog needed time to adjust, she was siphoning your dues for toys and food and sitting on a non-compliant garage that violates the very laws she waves at the rest of us. A man in the front row stood. Is that true? About the city? Right on cue, the clubhouse door opened. Cold air knifed in, carrying the smell of snow and exhaust from the wide, clean street outside. 2 people stepped in, one in a city parka with a zoning badge, the other with a county ID on a lanyard. Sorry to interrupt, the zoning inspector said, lifting a folder. We're here regarding a complaint on a non-conforming accessory structure on this block. We tried the homeowner's door. Someone said we'd find the HOA president here. Every head swiveled to Carol. The inspector flipped the folder open. On top were the same aerials I'd printed, the same plat, a summary of the 1957 overlay highlighted in yellow. We'll need to schedule a full inspection of your garage and property lines, ma'am. There are serious questions about encroachment and unpermitted expansion. Carol's mouth opened and closed. This is harassment. All over a dog house. The county rep spoke up, eyes cool, and will be reviewing HOA expenditures and meeting minutes. Purchases coded as security and consulting without board approval are a problem. She tapped the coffee-stained rulebook on the table. Your authority comes from your documents, not the other way around. The room buzzed like a hive kicked over. Some neighbors stared at me, with something new in their faces. Not fear, but dawning respect. Others glared at Carol, connecting drones over their yards with the line items I'd laid out. I stayed standing, hands relaxed on the back of my chair, pink overcoat bright under the fluorescent lights. You wanted to make an example tonight, Carol, I said quietly. You chose the wrong exhibit. Her voice rose to a shriek. You and your ugly little doghouse did this to me. The zoning inspector shook his head. No, ma'am. The records did. But exposing the HOA in public was only the beginning. What came next was going to hurt them exactly where they felt it most, in their power and in their pocketbooks. If you think this fallout is satisfying, wait until you hear what happened when the citations, fines, and audits started to land. Tell me in the comments what you'd want to see happen to a board like this, because their punishment was just getting started. Fallout from that meeting didn't explode. It settled, like fresh snow over a crime scene. The next morning, I stepped onto our wide, clean street in my pale pink overcoat, gray scarf tucked, neatly, brown slacks brushing the thin layer of ice. Half the neighborhood suddenly rediscovered how to say hello. Hey, Eleanor, the man who'd once backed away at the mailbox said, shuffling his mail. Didn't realize how bad the board was. I smiled, that small, ironic curve. Most people don't read the attachments. While gossip swirled, the real punishment arrived by certified mail. First came zoning. A bright orange, notice of violation, went up on Carol's beloved 2-car fortress. I watched from my porch as the inspector walked the property lines with a tape and clipboard. Carol, in her neon green jacket and purple beanie, trailed behind, voice shrill enough to carry across the hard winter air. This is ridiculous. It's been like this for decades. Ma'am, the inspector said, holding a copy of the 1957 overlay, it's been non-compliant for decades. There's a difference. You'll either need to remove the encroaching portions or apply for a variance. Given the easement, I wouldn't bet on the variance. 2 weeks later, a second notice, condemnation pending, structural removal required. Translation, Her illegal expansion had to go. The bump out, the extra bay, the storage where she kept her drones, cameras, and towers of old newsletters, all scheduled for surgical demolition. Then the county weighed in. An audit letter hit every mailbox. Irregularities in HOA spending, missing approvals, self-reimbursement without board consent. An emergency election was ordered. Until then, all non-essential spending was frozen. No more toys on the association's dime. The fines she gleefully stacked on me, void. The Oversight Division cited defective notice, improper process, and misuse of lien threats. Our account shows your balance at zero. The interim treasurer told me over the phone, mortified. And, we're refunding 3 months of dues to all residents for the security assessment. Turns out most of that went to pizza and gadgets. Mark came home one evening, cheeks pink from the cold, to find me at the table with a small stack of checks and letters. Our old Golden thumped his tail. The rescued dog snored by the heater. The cats lorded over the back of the sofa. "What's all that?" he asked. "Restitution," I said. They voided the fines, refunded the assessments. And this, I tapped a letter bearing the city's seal, is my favorite. Formal confirmation that a temporary, weather-appropriate outdoor shelter for a vetted foster animal is not a nuisance structure, under code. He laughed, relief cracking across his face. So the ugly dog house is officially legal. More legal than her garage, I said, out on the curb. Neighbors watched the day the crew came. Men in heavy jackets and hard hats measured Carol's garage, talked quietly with the inspector, then started dismantling the forbidden bay. Sheet metal groaned. Cinder blocks clinked onto a flatbed. That proud, oversized box shrank, piece by piece, back toward its 1950s footprint. Carol raged the whole time, voice hoarse, purple beanie askew, neon green jacket flapping like a warning flag. "You can't do this. I'm the board president." "Not anymore," one of the workers said, nodding toward the new notice posted on the HOA bulletin board. Special election board vacancies. Her name was conspicuously absent from the candidate list. By spring, she was out as compliance chair, out as president, and under a repayment plan for the misused funds. The board, under county supervision, quietly negotiated with her. Resign, accept the city's orders, reimburse what you can, or face formal charges. The woman who'd threatened to put a lien on my home now had one hovering over her own future. Walking the street in my pink overcoat, gray scarf soft against my neck, I passed the stump of her once mighty garage, one shrunken bay, raw edges where the illegal walls had been. The new board had voted to ban drones and restrict cameras to front doors only with clear notice. The gossip once turned on us, now circled around Carol, and not kindly. Some nights, I'd see her curtains twitch when Mark and I took the dogs, the old Golden and the once lost, now solid and glossy, around the block. A few neighbors stopped to ask if we needed any extra blankets for fosters. One even apologized for believing the disease rumors. "I should have known better," she said, eyes on the dogs. "My kids still talk about that nice vet and his wife." "Then you know better now," I replied. From that point on, the HOA operated very differently. Budgets went out with real detail. Notices followed the law instead of Carol's temper. People actually read the governing documents. But there was still one thing that kept me up, just a little. If one board bully could twist an entire community around a plastic doghouse, how many other neighborhoods were living under the same quiet bureaucratic terror, just waiting for someone patient enough to pick up a pen and start reading? Hit the like button if you think more people should learn how to fight back with paper instead of screaming, because this war wasn't won with shouting matches. It was won with dates, signatures, and a zoning clause everyone else forgot existed. By the time spring really arrived, the snow on our wide, clean street had melted into neat little rivers running along the curbs. Without that thin white layer, The neighborhood looked less like a postcard and more like what it really was, just another place full of people capable of being either decent or cruel. I still walked it in my pale pink overcoat and light gray scarf, brown slacks brushing dry pavement, glasses on the tip of my nose. Habit. Armor. The dogs padded beside me, our old golden on one side, the once lost, once skinny rescue on the other, now solid and glossy from good food and safety. The cats, of course, ruled the house we left behind. Carol's garage, or what was left of it, sat like a pulled tooth at the end of the block. The extra bay was gone. The bump out that had squatted over the easement, cut clean away, fresh siding marked where the illegal walls had been. The orange condemnation notice had been replaced with a pale, bureaucratic bandage. Compliance achieved. Final inspection pending. I watched her once from my porch as she stood in that neon green jacket and purple beanie staring at the stump of her empire. No clipboard, no camera, no HOA rulebook clutched like scripture. Just a tired woman who'd bet everything on control and lost it to signatures and statutes. She avoided me after that. The one time our paths crossed at the mailbox, she flinched like I might yell. I didn't. I just adjusted my scarf, smiled that small ironic curve, and said, "Good morning." The HOA itself changed in ways that would bore most people and delight me. Meeting minutes went out on time. Budgets arrived with line items, so clear even the most distracted neighbor could see where every dollar went. Fines became rare and carefully documented. Warnings came with actual citations instead of Carol's feelings. The new board president, a soft-spoken engineer who'd watched quietly from the second row the night everything exploded, knocked on our door one evening. I answered in my pink coat, glasses low, cats weaving around my ankles. "We're revising the pet and structure rules," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "Would you mind looking them over before we vote? We'd like them to comply with city code this time." I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, Mark's work notes piled beside my binder, and redlined the draft into something sane. Space for fosters, as long as they were vaccinated and not disturbing anyone. Clarity on temporary shelters. A line that said, plainly, that compassion was not a violation. On warmer evenings, neighbors started stopping by the fence instead of speeding past. Kids asked if they could pet the miracle dog who'd once been a shivering shadow under a truck. One mother, the same who'd pulled her child away from me in the depths of winter, met my eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I believed her. I won't make that mistake again." I didn't gloat. That isn't my style. I just nodded and said, "Then some good came out of this." Mark liked to joke that I'd retired from court only to become the quiet ombudsman of one frozen little cul-de-sac. When a new neighbor got a questionable notice about his front yard tree, he came to me first. I showed him where to find the right paragraph, how to send a calm email asking for the specific rule, and the board vote authorizing enforcement. "You really don't have to scream to win," I told him. "You just have to keep the paper." Sometimes late at night, I'd sit by the window with a book, gray hair down my back, and watch the streetlights paint clean lines across the asphalt. It looked peaceful again, but I knew better than to mistake silence for safety. For every Carol who gets caught by the very system she misused, there are a dozen more clutching their clipboards and rule books in other zip codes, betting that no one will ever bother to read past page 1. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's currently appearing on your screen.